PAX, Journey Home, Chapter 34. Around midnight, Peter dragged his mattress off the bed and shoved it out the window. It was a trick he came up with when he had first had PAX and couldn't sleep for worrying if the little fox kit was okay alone in his pen outside. Back then, he had to be sneaky about it and risk discovery in the morning if he didn't wake in time, but tonight he let the mattress thump onto the porch, then climb out after it with a blanket. He lay down and closed his eyes, but he still couldn't sleep. The day had been wonderful. At least the hour he'd spent with PAX had been wonderful. That wasn't what was keeping him up. It was the argument about what to do next. On the other hand, now he knew. PAX was alive. He was thriving in the wild. Peter could let go of all that guilt, and he'd learned his lesson about getting attached. Only a few would go back to the river and call for PAX tomorrow, starting the old danger up again, and Peter was finished being a fool. On the other hand, it had been a long, long time since he'd spent such a fine hour. Peter had apologized as best he could and had felt PAX understood and forgave him. It had been good to be together again. It had felt like filling his cup. He lay back and allowed himself to recall every minute. He almost hadn't gone. He'd been sure it was PAX he'd seen the day before, but he'd called and waited for half an hour with no other sign of him. Maybe he'd fooled himself. All the way to the river, he'd talked himself down from any hope. Even if it was PAX, he might not show up again. And if he did, he was a wild fox now. He would be wary and had every right to be. But when Peter came out of the woods, PAX was there, sitting in the middle of the field, just as if he'd been expecting him. Peter had approached cautiously, hands out low, because like a dog, PAX liked to sniff at strangers' hands before deciding to bolt or stay. His heart sped up as PAX rose. He'd figured PAX might need to come near, then back away, testing and deciding, but PAX had merely bounded over as though they'd been apart for a day, not a year. He licked Peter's hand eagerly, then leaned against his thigh, the gesture that meant he'd like Peter to scratch his head. Shocked, Peter had, "What? Just like that? I'm forgiven?" he asked. "You don't have to make me pay?" PAX rubbed his cheek against Peter's jeans. Peter knew this meant that PAX was marking him as his own. So apparently, yes, just like that, he'd been forgiven. The forgiveness had been a physical relief. He felt as though he'd been collecting rocks all year, carrying more and more on his back, and then all at once they crumbled to dust. As Peter had examined his old friend, PAX had leaned in to sniff at his neck and shoulders, his face, as if he was doing the same thing. Peter had laughed out loud at that. "You're wondering if I'm okay? I'm okay." He stroked PAX's ruff. "Do I seem different? Because you do." Although it was hard to say exactly how. PAX wasn't any bigger, but somehow he seemed more rugged. His coat was definitely thicker, maybe shinier. He was obviously healthy. Tears of relief had risen. "You're okay," he whispered, forehead pressed to PAX's. "I'm so sorry about what I did, but look at you. You came out okay." They'd played them, the old games, and PAX remembered them. Thirsty afterward, PAX had taken a drink from his thermos, and the realization had struck. If PAX lived near here, he was drinking this poisoned water. PAX was an adult, but still. He poured out a handful for PAX. "The water here is bad now, but don't worry, it will be fixed. It will be clean and pure again after the water warriors." For a second, Peter had thought about how good it might feel to be part of the restoration here. Now it was personal, and now he would have this new, good memory of PAX, not the old, sad one. Maybe. He offered his handful of water, again and again, until at last PAX drank some. After that, they rested together. In front of them, the river ran with a quiet murmur. Peter watched it intently, trying to imagine what Jade would have seen in it. Some wisdom, some helpful advice. But all he found were questions. "There's so much I want to know," he'd said to his old pets. "Those first days, how did you learn to hunt? Where did you sleep? Was that you Jade saw at the reservoir? Do you have a family now? More than ever before, Peter wished that Pax could talk to him. Why are you here? Were you looking for me? Did you know somehow that I was coming? Pax had seemed to listen, and when Peter had told him how sorry he was, it had felt as if his fox forgave him. But then Pax had suddenly jumped up, barked, and left without looking back. Except for the faintest impression in the grass beside him, Pax left no trace of his visit. Now, lying on the porch at midnight, Peter thought about blame and forgiveness again. Maybe they were only human inventions. He remembered again the moment his father had asked to be forgiven, and the relief in his eyes when Peter had done it, and the relief Peter had felt too. For a second he wished he could see Jade again to ask her about these things. But that wasn't going to happen. Suddenly everything he was thinking about seemed cowardly. Look at Pax. Pax had been hurt far worse than Peter by what had happened last year, but he had shown up. He had given himself over to whatever would happen. It felt as if his only question had been, do I want to see Peter? And the answer had been, yes. So he'd gone. No drama, no cowardly worry about what might happen. But did that make Pax foolish or wise? Peter realized he was doing it again, fretting over things he could just feel. The only question now was, do I want to see Pax again? And the answer was, yes. He would go back tomorrow.